My family was living in Morgan Hill, and of course I was at Stanford and Cal. And as soon as the day I graduated, I left for naval flight training in Pensacola, Florida. The draft was going on, but you had a couple of choices, and if you came from a poor family in Morgan Hill, I didn't have a lot of options. I think I was smart, and I wanted to fly airplanes, and I knew that, but I had nothing to fall back on. That's what I wanted to do, so you don't fail. You didn't fail. Failure was not an option. I remember the first night, and I had grown up in the Bay Area and didn't know what high humidity was about. And I remember sopping wet in my first night in the bunk, just as uncomfortable. And here's a college graduate thinking, what the heck have I gotten into? I was so hot, and I remember that night very well. And the next day I remember all the push-ups we did. We had DIs from the Marine Corps that ran us around for 8 weeks. Yeah, they were all master sergeants from the Marine Corps. They were all killed in Vietnam. The first day on there was, my room was small. I lived with 2 other guys in a very small bunk, and they were stacked bunks type things, and it was nice. And we ate in a wardroom. We watched Clint Eastwood movies, all the spaghetti westerns at nighttime. I loved them, saw them all about 10 times, and that's what we did in those days. Even junior to me, or the enlisted people, they had like 30 people in a room. Small room, small. Off an aircraft carrier, CVA-31, bomber Richard. We had an air wing, which means that you have 2 fighter squadrons, 3 attack squadrons, which are the bomber. We were very focused. Our job was to go kill the bad guys, and that's what we were focused on. Everybody was a professional. We knew we had a job to do. The guys on the ground, the biggest bad thing in Vietnam on the ground was VD for the guys and drugs. They got into it. On a Navy aircraft carrier, you couldn't get either one. Couldn't happen. We got a movie at nighttime, and we got to read. I think the funniest thing I ever saw, we complained that we wanted desserts. And they would have ice cream, but it was reconstituted milk that we drank, which was awful. And they made the ice cream out of the same reconstituted milk, however you do that, and it was awful. So we said, why can't we have cheesecake? And the cooks in those days, they were all Filipino. That's how they got their American citizenships. Well, our cook, and like most of the cooks, were Filipino, and he said, why do you want cheesecake? I said, we just want something different. You know, we're 22 years old and we're complaining. Well, the next day we got out there and we looked, and he says, got it. And he had a white cake cut like this, and he had melted American cheese on top of it. No, he was dead serious. It wasn't a joke. He had made like 4,000 of those things. He simply wrote letters. And to get an answer to a letter took about 30 days. And then sometimes, you weren't supposed to tell exactly where you were in any war situation, and somebody would open your mail and black out what they didn't want your wife to see. So we were told, don't say times, locations, and dates. Say stuff like, I love you. And that paper, Stars and Stripes, is important, because that was our only news back. And we found out later that we don't know who was creating all those stories, but I was in a lot of the activities that were happening at the time, combat operations. It didn't come out in print. They were not true. It was to sell the American public on how good the war was going. Not true. Some were, but a lot weren't. We had a funeral about every 10 days, and they would have a ceremony. We'd stand up there on a hot flight deck on Tonkin Gulf in our what they call choker whites, very formal whites. They would throw a wreath over the side, and a lot of the bodies were never recovered, especially the ones that went in the water. And that's what we did. Well, there was funny times and unfunny times. One of the funny ones were that we were called in on a target. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but they said there's an animal down there carrying something like 2 tons of ammunition, and it was just about to cross the border into the DMZ area to go into South Vietnam. And I got a direct strike with a couple of rockets, and it turned out to be an elephant. And the elephant initially blew up, but then all the ammunition on it blew up. And later I got up the next morning, and the enlisted guys that did my each had our own airplane, had a great big pink elephant painted on the side of it. The fun times, you remember. The bad times, just get tired. I mean, most of it was fatigue. War is very fatiguing. It just drags on and on and on. You know, when people are dying every few days and disappearing, what you do is you stop making friends with the new guys coming in. I don't want to know you. I don't want to know your wife. I don't want to know that you have kids at home. It's one of the worst things about war. You stop and playing. We didn't have time. We were exhausted. We were tired. That kid you see right there walking was a very, very tired 24-year-old that was absolutely, I thought I was 1,000 years old. I was so tired. It's very fatiguing. It was after all those commands that I had, and I didn't want to falter all, so I just walked away. I shook hands with my boss at the time, and I was at Alameda actually finishing up, and said, it's over. It's been nice. Thanks. When it was over, it was over. And we walked away and said, okay, this war, especially if you get spit at in LA airport, that's a bad taste. No pun intended. Now, we weren't making a lot of money. My last year in Vietnam, I went back, and that was getting shot at the most. In 1969, I made gross, with combat pay and all the other extras, because I was doing what I was doing, I made $14,000. Wow. For the whole year. That was it. That's what we got paid. So you didn't do it for the pay. God, you didn't do it for the pay. During the Vietnam part, we went to Australia, we went to Hong Kong, Korea, although we were off the coast, and the Philippines. That's basically what we got to see, because that was that part of the world. I finished in 1993 as a Navy captain. That's an 06. 1969. I was hired with American Airlines on Monday, September 16th, 1969. I went right to work. And it was by design. I was always an A-type personality. But I got out of high school early. I got out of college early. I was very A-type. I didn't want to waste time. I actually got to an interview. And the interview was interesting. There was 20 people in the interview. And all of them were in wingtip shoes, three-piece suits. They looked fantastic. Most of them were Air Force. And in those days, three-piece suits were in, dark, and very handsome guys. And I came in and I had work khakis on that I had flown back on this C-141. And they looked at me and said, you are so screwed. You're not dressed right and everything. And then the chief pilot came out, and he looked around the room and said, welcome. And he looked at me and said, what are you doing here, and where's your suit? And I said, well, it's on the boat. I was hired on the spot. And those other 19 guys, I said, you guys can come back tomorrow. They just wanted to hear about the war. That was one of the best days of my life. I got a Silver Star, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 38 Air Medals, Meritorious Service, and about 40 others that don't count so much. I'm a life member of Association of Naval Aviation, and the United States Navy Tailhook Association. I'm a graduate of the War College, and I'm on the foundation for China Lake. I go up to the Hornet about every 6 weeks and listen to lectures and stuff like that. And I'm still very involved. I'm also the blue and gold officer for this area, so if somebody wants to go to an academy, I will give them the advice they need from this point on to tell them how to get into the Naval Academy or the Air Force or whatever, West Point.